The Meyers Manx sprang from the soul of a free-spirited Californian who loved the beach and always wanted to have fun. It was an inexpensive, go-anywhere car that immediately clicked with a generation of like-minded people. Bruce Meyers created a legend, but has had to fight to keep his vision alive. Off-roading has become a sport and a pastime enjoyed all around the world. Every weekend, families and friends head up to the mountains or out to the desert to have some fun. In the mountains of Southern California, near Big Bear Lake, the Meyers Manx Dune Buggy Club gathered in the fall of 2004 to share their love of their favorite vehicle. While the club accepts fiberglass buggies of any make, the true badge of honor among these adventurous souls is the one reading Meyers Manx. For nearly half a century, the Meyers Manx has epitomized the dune buggy experience. Its shapely fiberglass body is an icon of the off-road adventure. These go-anywhere, do-anything vehicles appeal to people with a can-do attitude. To them, shearing off a wheel is an opportunity to use some creative driving techniques. Any adversity adds to the day's fun. This group of die-hard Manx lovers was up to the mechanical challenge. They were sure they could drive on 3 wheels.
Two riders. Oh, there we go. Okay.
All righty then.
Unlike most four-wheel drive vehicles that conquer the world through power, the Meyers Manx was created to sort of surf the trails. Its lightweight, rugged body and chassis don't need much power to explore the backcountry. We found that the Meyers Manx really is an attitude or state of mind, as well as a vehicle. Most Meyers Manx owners tend to view mass-produced off-road vehicles with thinly veiled contempt.
Surprisingly, these things can go where Jeeps can't go. And there's a saying around, we'd rather be lost in a buggy than found in a Jeep. So, and this is all Bruce Meyers' fault. He started this, and so we're just picking up the banner and carrying it a little further.
Bruce Meyers dreamed up and produced these iconic dune buggies. His creation helped give birth to the sport of off-road racing and the Baja 1000. Meyers vehicles embodied the spirit of California in the 1960s. They were simple, inexpensive, colorful, and fun to drive. They caught on immediately. Magazines like Hot Rod featured the Manx on the cover, and Meyers saw sales of his fiberglass-bodied cars soar. The cars were a thrill to drive and handled like sports cars. They even won races like the Pikes Peak Hill Climb, beating much heavier Corvettes and Cobras to the top. The Manx's ride to the top is a remarkable story that started with Bruce Meyers' love for adventure. It was nurtured on the beaches of Southern California, flourished on the back roads and dirt trails of Baja, California, and would lead him to hero status among off-road adventurers around the world. We wanted to understand what influenced Bruce Meyers to create the Meyers Manx, one of the most revolutionary vehicles ever invented. We started by showing up at his weekly get-togethers at San Onofre Beach, just north of San Diego. Meyers and his friends, some he's known since the 1930s, still surf, play guitar, and sing. It's like a scene out of a surf movie from the 1960s. We found out that Bruce has been surrounded by the ocean and music nearly all of his life. His mother, Peggy O'Neill, was a well-known singer. She was so popular that people wrote songs for her, hoping that if she sang them, it would sell sheet music.
You walked into the Five and Dime store, you went up to the piano player up on a raised area, and you looked at all the sheet music, and if you liked something, you'd hand it to the piano player, and they'd play it back to you. If you liked it, you'd take it home, and then you had to play it yourself.
Songs like Peggy O'Neill and Has Anybody Seen My Gal, that included the classic description, 5'2", eyes of blue, were written about her. People rushed out to buy the sheet music. Some lingered around the stage doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of Peggy. One fan, Jack Myers, agreed with the lyrics. Peggy O'Neill is a girl who could steal any heart, anywhere, anytime. He pursued the young singer until she agreed to marry him. They ended up in Detroit, where he went to work for Henry Ford. Meyers convinced the inventor of the Model T to set up dealer networks.
He kept telling Henry Ford, he says, you can't keep selling these things off of a freight car, out of a book, which is the way you bought a Model T. You took a catalog and ordered it, and it came to you that way. And so he says, you got to have some dealers. So my Henry said, go ahead, Jack, take off and take a car and go across country. Well, finally he landed here in the West, where he had finally landed. The first Ford dealership was in San Francisco.
They eventually moved to Los Angeles and started a family. This soon included son Bruce, who was born in Los Angeles on March 12, 1926. The family kept growing and needed more space. Later that year, the large Meyers family moved to Manhattan Beach, California. The family spent a lot of time by the water. The move started a lifelong love affair with the ocean that still draws Bruce back to the same beaches he knew as a kid. Unfortunately, knowledge of the ocean didn't prevent tragedy from striking.
My brother was lost in the surf. Brother George was lost at the age of 10 years old. And Grandma O'Neill was a very devout Catholic, and she stayed on her knees at the water's edge and prayed for 3 days for him to return. Well, Dad went and rented the Ford Trimotors from what is now LAX, which was Mines Field in those days. And they flew back and forth, and he got all the fishermen out of Redondo Beach to drag their nets for a couple of 3 days. But George finally washed ashore right in front of Grandma. So Grandma believes that she prayed him ashore. And so by the fact that George was lost that way, we were not allowed to go into the water.
Bruce missed his brother, and he busied himself with other activities, including building a prize-winning coaster car. But he couldn't stay away from the water.
Of course, all I did was spend my childhood coming home with my blonde hair dripping down the end of my nose and my trunks all wet with sand in the crotch, and always being spanked and put to bed and told to stay in the house for a week from the time I can remember. But I still became a lifeguard and wound up jumping off the pier and becoming a surfer and all that. My life was a beach boy, sandlot kind of a thing. I had an old 39 Ford station wagon that was surfboards always sticking out the back. And it was the picture of the goof off on the beach. You know, that's where I come from. I'm the original, I suppose.
One of his other passions was cars. Like a lot of teenagers in Southern California, Meyers was drawn to hot rodding. After a few trips to the junkyard, you could scrounge enough parts to build a car that looked cool in the streets and that could be raced. The dry lake beds of the high deserts were only a couple of hours away from the beach. Meyers joined the fun and took his car up there to see what it could do. It was a free-spirited group committed to speed. They were hands-on, self-taught inventors whose passion would eventually create the sport of drag racing and change the automotive world forever. All of Bruce's seemingly unrelated pursuits were laying the groundwork for the creation of his revolutionary vehicle. Unfortunately, the days of fun on the beach and racing at the dry lakes were about to be put on hold when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. America was at war, and most young men, like Bruce, longed to join the fight. He had to wait until he turned 18 in 1944. He and a friend hitchhiked to the naval shipyards in Oakland, California, and enlisted in the Navy.
Wound up in the gunnery on deck on a carrier, which happened to be the flagship of the whole fleet of hundreds and hundreds of ships with Admiral Mark Mitcher on board. So the Bunker Hill was the ship. The Japanese wanted to nail us. We got finally nailed by 2 kamikazes. We were ordered to abandon because I was back in the smoke at the stern of the ship where the fire was slowly eating its way towards us. So the captain said, jump over, so we did.
His years of swimming at the beach saved his life, and he saved several others.
I wound up doing some things that I'd done as a lifeguard. You know, as a lifeguard, and the panicked person will try to climb up you. If he decides to climb up on top of you, he'll drown you. And a guy just wanted to climb up on me. Well, I had a life jacket, so I finally took off my life jacket and gave it to him because I couldn't tow him around. I didn't want to, and I'm so much of a swimmer, I didn't need the life jacket. But I'm glad I had it. There was a pilot, he was floating around in his little Mae West, and he'd been terribly flash burned. Turned him around, finally started towing him like this. So I just side paddled towards the destroyer that's over here a couple of miles and up upon a motor whaleboat that came out with lines, and I gave them the pilot.
When he finally climbed aboard the rescue ship, he was pretty low-key about his heroism.
I found my own division commander, who was just a lieutenant of my 2nd Division gunnery. Meyers, are you all right? What's your story? I said, no big deal. And that's about all I told him. Well, I'd done the same thing as a lifeguard, and nobody ever talked about it. You pull a lot of people ashore as a lifeguard. And it was just another piece, you know, another day's work in the water, kind of. A sailboat builder of those times called Jensen Marine and the Cal sailboat line. And so Jack said, I need somebody that can do tooling. And he was looking at my catamaran. I said, why don't you work for me? So I did.
Bruce ended up building the tooling for a successful series of fast, all fiberglass Jensen boats. This gave him the skills needed to build his fiberglass-bodied dune buggies. While Bruce Meyers built fiberglass boats for Jensen Marine, he began work on a catamaran of his own, the Hinano. He wanted to sail back to Tahiti with a friend. It took him a couple of years to build, but finally it was ready to launch in 1961. However, the boatyard, and therefore the boat, was blocks away from the water. In true Tom Sawyer fashion, the ever-inventive Meyers decided he'd have a party and con the revelers into helping him maneuver the boat down to the beach. It was a massive undertaking, but after a few beers, the crowd cheerfully pitched in. It was a sleepy fall day, and there wasn't any traffic on the streets. A good thing, since he'd neglected to obtain permits to move the boat. Once trailers were borrowed from another boatyard, they use that term loosely, they were underway. A couple of cars blocked their progress and had to be picked up and moved. But there were plenty of strong young men on the crew, and this wasn't a problem. They made it to the launch area, where they encountered a sign forbidding launches without permission. They uprooted the sign, and the Hinano slipped into the water. It was a fast and sleek catamaran that took Meyers and his friends to Catalina for great weekend getaways. But his one friend, who'd agreed to come along on the Tahitian adventure, kept backing out. Eventually, Meyers had to sell the Hinano. But he discovered another way to have fun at the beach. Bruce Meyers had studied and taught art. Form and function were important to him. As the body took shape, he gave it the name Manx due to its short rear end, which resembled the animal's bobbed tail. It was finally done and ready to roll on a perfect summer day in July of 1964. Bruce took it for a spin and turned heads. It was the lightweight, fast, and responsive vehicle he'd hoped to build. He had his prototype, but he had to figure out how to sell his easy-to-build kit car. He decided to offer it in 2 different kits. Bruce thought most people would want the bare-bones A kit that he sold for $350. He designed this option for the home craftsman like himself. Someone with a small budget could transform the 3 basic components, body, hood, and dash panel, into a Manx by fabricating the additional hardware items they'd need to finish the car. For $530, you could buy Kit B and get all the components and hardware necessary to transform an old VW into a new Manx. It came with a complete set of brackets, bolts, nuts, washers, and frames that a Manx builder would have to scrounge from another source if they bought the less expensive A kit. He felt it was great looking and fairly priced, but Bruce didn't know if anyone else would share his feelings about his buggy.
I just hung my hat on my wanting something that I like the looks of. I hope the rest of the world feels the same way. I guess that's what happened.
The Meyers Manx became an instant classic that was recognized as the quintessential dune buggy.
You just see a Coke bottle, you know it's a Coke bottle, nothing else. A Volkswagen profile is a Volkswagen Beetle. People here locally in a little hardware store, a girl says, "What's Meyers Manx?" And I pull out a business card and it has a picture of a Manx on it. She says, "Oh, a dune buggy." So the shape says dune buggy, I guess.
People responded to the fun it promised. One of his goals for the new buggy was to make it easier to explore Baja. To Bruce, it was a place somewhat like the Tahiti he'd experienced. And it too was about to change.
So Baja was this lonely, exquisite experience of nature, and its history is all about religion and mining. Today it's not, but it's about tourism and agriculture today. But Baja then was this wonderful historic place to go and plow around in.
Driving in Baja was an adventure. There was only about 120 miles of paved road between Tijuana in the north and La Paz, 1,000 miles south. Guidebooks suggested allowing 10 days to make the journey in a fully loaded 4-wheel drive truck. A motorcycle had made it in 39 hours in 1962. But no one else had attempted such a wild stunt. That is, until Meyers and his high school friend Ted Mangles decided to take the Baja Challenge. Bruce and buddy Ted Mangles drew up a plan to conquer Baja. They determined how much gasoline they'd need, filled their buggy with gas cans, and set out.
The biggest problem was getting gas because all the ranchos go to sleep at night, and you'd have to sit there all night and wait to get some gas, so you have to carry the whole thing.
They took some canned sardines and saltines to fuel themselves and began the trip from Tijuana on the first leg of a quest, the feasibility run.
We drove the course from the top to the bottom. We had another couple of buggies with us as just fun cars. And I drove very hard, but not to break the car, and then camped every night. And we added up all our driving hours, and we did it very easily, under 30 hours.
Once in La Paz, they turned around and headed north for a record run. Racing over rocks and dirt, through sand washes and down dirty, dusty roads was brutal. They sheared off their brake line, nearly lost the transmission, and ended up wearing most of the sardines. But they made it to Tijuana. But their challenge was finding someone at the tourism office to certify the arrival.
We got to the office an hour before it opened. We had to sit and sleep in the car, and he wouldn't give us the hour that he was late to work.
The Manx clocked in at 34 hours and 45 minutes. They'd beaten the motorcycle's record by over 5 hours. News of the buggy's triumph hit the wire service and made headlines around the world.
So it's still a crazy thing to do, but the phone started ringing nevertheless. And this thing went to Detroit and the New York papers and all this stuff, and the phone started ringing a lot.
By November of 1967, the first official Baja 1000 race was set to begin. It was run by a new organization, the National Off-Road Racing Association, NORA, whose founder was inspired by Meyers' record run.
This guy by the name of Ed Perlman on the phone, he says, "You've really done something. Why don't we put together an organization?" I said, "I have no time, but I'll help you." So he says, "We'll get a restaurant, we'll come together and have a meeting, and we'll vote in officers. We'll have a president and all that." I said, "Great." So I gathered up 10 or 15 people and came to this meeting where he stood up and said, "All right, come to order. I want you to know that I'm the president," himself, and this is Pete Condos and so forth. These are the guys that are the henchmen. So in about a month, we had the first race.
Bruce and a few friends went down to Baja to launch the maiden event. The race attracted 68 vehicles that were divided into 4 categories: production, two-wheel drive, passenger cars, and light trucks; production four-wheel drives and VW-based dune buggies like the Manx; experimental vehicles, and motorcycles. Meyers fielded a team of 5 Manxes. 3 were factory-sponsored and 2 were brought down by friends. They joined the crowd favorite, a beat-up '56 Chevy that the owners hoped to sell after the race to finance their trip home. There was also an assortment of Ford Broncos, Jeeps, and motorcycles.
Those days, it was a kind of a gasoline alley approach. There was all this stuff coming out of the backyard, and everybody thought his Jeep could win, or his Bronco, or his pickup truck, or whatever.
Unlike any other race, there were no paying spectators, no tickets, no concessions, and no way for the organizers to make money. They'd pulled together $10,000 from a few sponsors so they could hand out some prizes and gotten the support of the Baja Tourism Office. It was enough to launch a new motorsport. The checkered flag dropped, and they were off. Pistons were lost. Radiators were punctured. Wheels were bent. Some crashed. One slammed into a cow. As the racers encountered rugged rocks and sand washes, it became clear that this was potentially dangerous. They drove on through the barren desert, through towns and villages to the fueling checkpoints set up by the volunteers. It soon turned into a race between a team riding a 1964 Triumph motorcycle and Vic Wilson and Ted Mangles piloting a red Manx. The last stretch of the 100 miles of the run was paved, and the Manx roared ahead of the motorcycle into La Paz to set a new record, 27 hours and 38 minutes. The Manx had won the first Baja 1000, and the team celebrated as mariachis played. On the heels of the success in the Baja 1000, they reaped a publicity bonanza. Coverage in car magazines like Hot Rod, Popular Mechanics, and Road and Track, and in the mainstream media helped put the dune buggy in the public eye. People started to drive them everywhere. Meyers set up a dealer network to keep up with demand for the Manx. As their popularity grew, others began to copy the design and sell knockoffs. Meyers tried to defend his design, but patent suits are a long and expensive venture. He fought back by introducing new versions of the Manx. The Manx SR, or Street Roadster, was designed for people who just wanted a cool-looking street car. It was a little more aerodynamic, but used the same shortened VW floor plan as the original. He sold about 600 SRs. He also produced the Lifeguard, for the LA County lifeguards and Forest Service rangers. The cars came with a flat rear deck that was perfect for hauling equipment, but he couldn't ignore off-roading. He developed a souped-up version of the Manx just for off-road racing and took it back to Baja in 1968. He called it the Toad because it had to be trailered or towed on normal roads. Beefier tires, bigger wheels, and a 4-cylinder, water-cooled Ford V4 promised to make the Toad a strong competitor. He had high hopes for it. He confidently sparred with Parnelli Jones, and they both vied for the lead. But about 100 miles into the race, things went wrong.
I came into a dust cloud at a little arroyo, and I just flew into it, figuring it's going to be wherever I land, the road will be there, and it wasn't. I slapped the bank on the other side, the road dodged over here, and I just whammed into this thing at 55 or 60. So the Toad folded all up around my feet.
The Toad was totaled, and Meyers was seriously hurt.
I was lying, looking backwards with my back on the ground, with my leg bent, broken twice, back under the pedals, all smashed.
He was pried out, and after 15 hours in the back of a pickup, he made it to a hospital in San Diego. His 2 broken legs had taken a beating, and it was a long recovery. Unfortunately, the business was also taking a beating from the onslaught of cheap imitations.
They were all over the place. They were all over England and everywhere, you know. So we just gave it up and backed out of it and went away broke with our tail between our legs.
The dream of the Manx died in 1971. Bruce was bitter and retreated, while the sport of off-road racing he'd helped to start boomed. He tried car restoration and then spent years building a beach house getaway in Baja. He stayed out of the limelight until 1994, when he went to the French Super VW Nationals as a guest of Jackie Morel, the publisher of France's Super VWs. Meyers was honored for creating the Manx. At first, Bruce dismissed the invitation, but with his wife Winnie's encouragement, they went.
It's a wonderful time for me. Now that kind of snuffed out that desperate candle that I was trying to keep lit on being bitter, you know. So it brought me a lot of hope.
Morel encouraged Bruce to build a new Manx, start a club, and write a book. He wasn't a writer, but Winnie and Bruce did start a club, and he started to think about designing a new Manx called the Manxter.
The Manxter was born out of that trip and the many times we've been there since. That's really why I changed, was because of Jackie Morel. He gave me hope.
It took a few years of trial and error to get it right, but Bruce is excited about his new buggy. He wants to make sure it delivers more smiles per mile than any other car. Starting at a little over $16,000, it's still an affordable kit car that, like the Classic, uses a fiberglass body over a modified VW chassis and powertrain. It looks like a Manx, but it's been modernized. 4-wheel disc brakes are standard, and there's a long list of options that can make it a plush street buggy or a racer ready for Baja. In fact, Bruce couldn't resist taking a Manxter down to Baja to race in 2003. The Baja 1000 had changed quite a bit since Bruce and others started to race there almost 40 years ago. As interest in off-road racing continued to grow, drivers developed unique strategies to stay ahead of the pack.
A friend of mine told me many years ago when I first started racing off-road, Ivan, you have to learn when to go fast. There are times to go fast and there are times not to go fast. Don't get the two mixed up. In a road race, for example, you continually have to go fast to stay up with the crowd. In off-road racing, you're racing the terrain.
The Baja 1000 has become the biggest event in Baja. It attracts TV and movie stars, Indianapolis 500 drivers, NASCAR heroes, and major corporate sponsors, as well as thousands of fans. Bruce is recognized for having inspired the race.
It's a very great honor for me to meet a nice guy like you. Thank you for giving us, the whole country of Mexico something to live for, He's a national hero.
Bruce and the Manx went back and were ready to motor into the new millennium. After all these years, the sense of fun and adventure that had always been his driving force was still alive and well.
To me, if you don't get the freedom, you haven't attained much. If the money doesn't allow you to be able to go and do what you want to do, who are you? That's why I go to the beach to play the guitar. It's really like I gained what we're all here for. And all it is right there.
The Meyers Manx was a lively, go-anywhere vehicle that was affordable. It was at home on the beach, in the mountains, on the back roads of Baja, or just right for tooling around town. It was affordable and fun. Bruce Meyers launched an automotive revolution with the Manx in the 1960s. His funny little car stole hearts and became a legend. This unique machine set records and put smiles on everyone's face. A fitting symbol for a life well lived.